么树？
欢迎收看英文
什么树？
其实我分得清楚美国人跟英国人，但是我真的看不太出来美国人跟加拿大人有什么不一样
其实如果你跟一个加拿大人讲这个事情，他们会很生气，
真的
因为他们一点不想要跟我们在一起。我有一些加拿大朋友，我有一个室友，他特别会穿那个加拿大国旗在那个他的 T 恤上面，因为他就是让大家会看清楚，我不是美国人，我是加拿大人。对，那也不准我穿。
你是美国人就不要硬穿。
对啊，
因为你们这个伟大的川普总统最近也是做了一些很有趣的事，不但对全世界公告说我希望加拿大当我的第51州，还直接叫人家总理州长，这怎么回事？
对，这个有一点夸张。所以我会了解为什么现在加拿大人虽然他们很少真的表现他们有生气，但是最近他们
他们有表现了，对，再不表现就真的变第51州了。
对，
就算你这样强抢民女，直接叫人家州长，但是你有想过这两国人民有办法和平相处吗？
Well, that remains to be seen. But today, we're going to talk about what annoys Americans about Canadians and what annoys Canadians about Americans.
首先我们先来看加拿大人最受不了美国人的第一点就是枪。
What Canadians find annoying about Americans? Gun culture is out of control. Many Canadians believe that America's gun culture is out of control.A view shaped by stark differences in gun ownership, gun violence, and gun laws between the two countries. The U.S. has a much higher rate of gun ownership, with approximately 120 guns for every 100 people, leading to a higher incidence of gun-related violence, including mass shootings, homicides, and suicides. In contrast,Canada has stricter gun regulations and gun violence occurs much less frequently, making many Canadians concerned and perplexed by America's gun culture. Mass shootings, particularly in schools and public spaces, frequently make headlines in the U.S., and these events often dominate global news, heightening Canadian awareness of the problem. American gun laws are relatively lax,with easy access to firearms and laws in many states that allow people to carry concealed weapons. By contrast, Canada's gun regulations are much stricter, requiring background checks, safety courses, and permits. Many Canadians view America's relaxed gun laws as a key factor contributing to the high rates of gun violence. Furthermore,The U.S. has a deeply rooted gun culture tied to national identity, with the Second Amendment guaranteeing the right to bear arms. This stands in sharp contrast to Canada, which emphasizes public safety and collective well-being. Canadians generally see America's gun culture as a threat to social safety, believing it leads to unnecessary deaths and injuries. Overall,Many Canadians feel that America's gun culture has spiraled out of control, posing a significant risk to public safety.
对，太容易取得，而且取得以后也太容易滥用，所以当这种大型的枪击事件这种新闻显露在国际媒体的时候，大家真的是这感觉好像是美国独有，这很不舒服啊。
对，再加上那个不是只有一些人有这个问题，但是大部分的人是 OK。那个是一个全文化的问题。Like American gun culture kind of leads to the gun problems that we have.And then what happens is after people see gun violence, then they feel like they need to go buy a gun to protect themselves against gun violence. So it kind of is a vicious cycle, as we say, a cycle that kind of repeats itself. Gun problems, more guns, more gun problems.
相对的，这个加拿大其实他们虽然也有开放可以拥枪，但是呢，其实人家在2022年的时候是有全国手枪冻结令，意思就是说你不能够再自由的买卖或转让你的手枪。
This is the number one issue that will keep them from becoming America's 51st state. 我们不准有那么多
限制，
不要管那么多，好不好？
好， 这下一点呢，其实跟台湾的政治状况也是蛮像的。
很多地方其实有这个问题，但是我问的比较严重。Extreme political polarization. Many Canadians are increasingly uncomfortable with the political polarization in the U.S., especially as political extremes have become more pronounced in recent years. The sharp divide between the Democratic and Republican parties, fueled by contentious issues such as healthcare, immigration, and climate change, has created an atmosphere of intense political conflict. Under leaders like Donald Trump, political rhetoric became more divisive, with extremist views and partisan loyalty often taking precedence over collaboration and compromise. This political climate stands in stark contrast to Canada's more moderate and consensus-driven approach to governance. In Canada, political discourse tends to be more civil and balanced, with parties working together to find common ground on key issues. Canadians generally prefer pragmatic, center-left policies that focus on social welfare, public health care, and environmental sustainability. The political system in Canada is less polarized, and voters typically lean towards policies that promote unity and collective well-being. This makes the increasing extremism in U.S. politics hard for many Canadians to understand or accept. The growing political divide in the U.S. is also seen by many Canadians as damaging to social cohesion and national stability. The extreme partisanship in American politics often leads to gridlock and a lack of progress on critical issues, leaving many citizens frustrated. Canadians who are accustomed to more cooperative political processes worry that the U.S.'s political climate could lead to further polarization and even violence, especially given the rise of extremist groups. Ultimately, the political extremism in the U.S. stands as a stark contrast to Canada's more moderate and collaborative political culture, making many Canadians uneasy about the direction in which their southern neighbor is heading. In fact, now it's gotten so bad that I've noticed that when I see other foreigners on the street, sometimes I think they just are even less likely to greet me as another foreigner because I might be American and I might be on the wrong side.
难怪，因为人家加拿大他们是走这种共识决啊，或者是说我比较中间偏左一点，以社会福利或者是公共利益为主，而且是大家一起说好了就算了这样，所以比较不兴盛这种对立的政治讨论的状况，所以跟美国文化真的不太一样。
The problem with America and this polarization is that before, being a Democrat or Republican was just something that you had your political ideas about maybe the way the country should be run, but you could still be a person besides your political identity. But now, whether you're Republican or Democrat says something not just about what you believe about government, but about what you believe about life and morality and what it means to be American. So now when people have disagreements, they can't really have a good discussion about it anymore. It's just, you don't agree with me, so you're a bad person. You're not American because you're on the other side.
当然啊，这个历史上的一些事件已经让加拿大人看就很怕嘛。比如说2021年1月6号的国会暴乱因为这个总统的这个意见，那造成了国会大厦被攻击。那还有就是在这个政府停摆的场景里面，也因为两党预算或者是政策上面一直无法有一个共识，所以联邦政府就没钱运作下去。
Yeah, they couldn't come to an agreement about what to do with the budget, how to organize the budget, who gets what money. And since they couldn't come to an agreement, or they were in a gridlock, as we read in the article, just the government shut down.
对啊，所以加拿大人才不要当美国人啊。
对啊，这才不要，我也会了解啊。
来到第3点，我们要讨论的是这个医疗保健还有它的收入状况。在研究这个主题的时候，我也才知道说，其实加拿大他们的医疗制度其实蛮完善的，所以身为美国人应该这点特别痛哦。
对。
很贵嘞。
很贵。那我们看一下 expensive healthcare and income inequality. Many Canadians find it difficult to accept the high medical costs in the U.S. due to the stark contrast with Canada's public healthcare system. In Canada, healthcare is publicly funded, meaning that medical services are free for all citizens regardless of income. The Canadian system prioritizes universal access to healthcare, ensuring that everyone, from low-income individuals to the wealthy, can receive the care they need without financial barriers. In contrast, the U.S. relies heavily on private health insurance, with individuals often having to pay high premiums, deductibles, and out-of-pocket expenses. As a result, many Americans, particularly those with lower incomes, struggle to afford basic medical care. For Canadians, who are accustomed to a system that provides health care as a fundamental right, the idea that many Americans cannot afford essential medical services is difficult to understand.
那因为我们公司有很多加拿大人，我们就特别就这一点跟他们有一些询问。原来他们的这个健保医疗制度呢，是类似台湾的这个做法，他们是在缴税的时候，缴税的时候，其实就会把这个包含进去。所以其实在加拿大很多地方看医生是不用钱的。对
That's right, yeah.
吓一跳啊。
对啊，吓一跳，但是还是有一点复杂，因为 sometimes if you need special care or if you need a special procedure done, special medicine, you might end up still having to wait a long time
对
to be able to see the right doctor because it's very available. 其实在这里也会有这个状况，偶尔嘛。
但是我们台湾的医疗还是比较多啦，因为加拿大地很大嘛，而且他们有个制度比较特别，是他们每个家庭有家庭医生，所以你的所有的症状其实是要先经过这个家庭医生，然后他帮你判断以后说啊，你这个真的要去开刀了，你这个真的要去做一些特殊专科医生的治疗的时候，他要帮你转诊，你才可以去看。但是这一转呢，他等很久，等多久？中位数是要等30周。一年才52周，他等30周才可以转诊呢。
Yeah.
那有时候也太痛了吧。
So I've been asked to try to explain the healthcare system in the States. I think that there are professionals who still could not really explain the healthcare system in the States because it is really complicated. And part of what makes it complicated is the fact that we do not have a socialized healthcare system that's paid for by taxes by citizens and then administered by the government. Instead, it's a series of different private institutions with some government regulations on how they're able to administer funds. So the most basic thing is if you have healthcare, then there's a certain amount that you have to pay for that healthcare service each month to that private company. That money goes to them, and then if you have a problem, 你出事情的话, then there's a certain amount that they will cover, and then there's a certain amount that is the amount that you have to pay out of pocket, right? Now, that can change depending upon how good your health care is, and sometimes it can be really expensive because of a certain job that you have or the amount of people in your family or how many people that you have to pay healthcare for. So it becomes really complicated, especially if you need special medications. Some people are on medications that cost like $50 per pill, but there might be something about your condition that is not covered by your healthcare. So then you might end up having to pay mostly out of pocket for that and pay for your healthcare on top of that. So because of the fact that it's a private system, it becomes very complicated when you factor in different people's situations. So for some people, the healthcare system in America might work, but for other people, they might end up in this strange niche where they just are paying and paying and paying and getting very little benefit.
那身为美国人，真的最好不要生病。
对, yeah. A lot of people, their biggest fear is getting sick because I've heard stories of people who they're injured right? They get injured on the job or something, and then someone says, "Oh, let's call 911." And the person's like, "No, no, 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 please don't call 911 because if I have to ride in the ambulance to get to the hospital, $5,000 right there." And if they don't have insurance or they don't have the right insurance, then they're already in debt. But it becomes more complicated because you end up going into debt when you go to the hospital to get care if you don't have the right insurance or no insurance. But then that debt they can't really force you to pay it because of the kind of debt that it is. So your medical debt just keeps on stacking up. And then that does terrible things to the American economy. And the whole thing is really kind of a mess.
好，接下来下一点就是我们
USA, USA, USA
就是这样，因为美国人就是动不动就是要一直喊这个，而且很大声。你现在比较客气一点，对啊，加拿大人就不走这一套，他们就觉得你们很吵，怎么办呢？
对，我们真的很吵，其实。Yes, loud and confrontational behavior. In social and public settings, Canadians typically value subtlety and diplomacy. They prefer to engage in conversations calmly and avoid drawing attention to themselves. In contrast, Americans are frequently perceived as more assertive, expressing their opinions loudly and without hesitation, even in public spaces. This can make Canadians feel uncomfortable, as they view such behavior as confrontational or inconsiderate. Canadians are generally more inclined to listen to various viewpoints and approach discussions in a more balanced manner, while Americans may make a more aggressive stance when expressing disagreements. The perceived loudness of Americans is also a source of discomfort for Canadians. In public spaces, it is not uncommon for Americans to speak at a higher volume, which some Canadians interpret as a lack of awareness or respect for others.
这肯定就是文化差距了。就是对美国人而言，从小其实就被教育，就是你好好说，有自信的说，你说出来让大家明白你，这是一个很正面的事情。但是加拿大人，我个人觉得他会不会是因为他是大英国协一部分，就是走这种英式的这个绅士风啊，就是我要讲话比较pitch 要低一点，然后 tone 不要太高，然后让大家听起来很稳定，这样子。
Yeah, you have to remember that America is America because it didn't want to be part of England. Right?
哦，对耶，
Yes. Yeah, we got guns and we shot them and we told them to leave. That's why we're America, right?
没错。
所以这是我们的个性，就是一直留那种比较自在的。Now this thing of being very loud, though, it really depends on where you are.
当然啊。
It's so hard to make these kind of social general statements about Americans because Americans can be so different. You know, Americans in Texas do not want to be in the same room as Americans from New York, right? Oh, of course not. They're totally different.
他们也不一样。
对啊，就是不一定啊，但是就是那个 different states have their own kind of culture.
当然
Because America's so big, right?
对。
So it's difficult to really make these generalizations, but we are pretty loud. And we do typically just say what we want to say, unless you are from the Midwest, in which case you do something called being passive aggressive, where it's in the word. Just passive 就是比较 like 有点害羞这样子. Aggressive 就是 aggressive. So you're being passive aggressive. It's like when you say, like, oh, are you going to go outside wearing that? But what you really want to say is, you look stupid, you should go change your clothes. But what you say is, that's a very interesting outfit that you have on leaving the house tonight, just to make people feel it's passive, but it's aggressive.
接下来我们就是来看美国人比较受不了加拿大人哪些点。我必须说，这个攻击力真的太弱，难怪美国人吃死死的。
I'm looking for the actual like important point, and I'm not really seeing anything.
这真的跟就是我不喜欢你这样而已耶，真的很没有杀伤力。
They say sorry too much. Canadians frequently say sorry, not just as an apology, but as a sign of politeness, humility, and conflict avoidance. Influenced by British traditions, Canadian culture values social harmony, making sorry a common way to soften interactions. Canadians also dislike confrontation, using sorry to ease tension even when not at fault. This habit is reinforced by the Apology Act, which states that saying sorry does not mean admitting legal guilt. Additionally, Canada's multicultural society encourages politeness to foster inclusivity. Over time, sorry has become an unconscious habit, often used even when unnecessary. While some see it as excessive, it reflects Canada's kindness and respect, reinforcing its reputation as one of the world's most polite nations.
其实这个跟别的国家嫌弃台湾人太常说不好意思
对，
一样，
有
对。
点差不多的东西。
对，
对不对
其实我们的不好意思只是一个发语词，其实我们也不是真的不好意思什么，但是我们就是让这个场面比较缓和一点，或者是真的不想要踩人家脚一下，也不是什么重要很严重的事情，我们说啊不好意思不好意思，其实就过了。他说我可以感受到这个，他们很常说 sorry， 只是我觉得很有趣的是，他们为什么还有一条道歉法？
对，
哦，就是说一下，还用法律来说。我们说抱歉，我们在说对不起的时候，其实不是真的对不起，你还要立一条法来说一下，太有趣了。
So I think it's kind of hilarious and actually sort of cute, but in reality, this Apology Act is a very important piece of legislature because, for example, in a car accident, right? If you hit someone's car and then you get out the car and you say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," then that means that it was your fault, and then you 对啊，就是变成你要付比较多钱，
哇塞，
right?
那要很小心哎。
So if everyone is in the habit of apologizing all the time, then they need to create some kind of system that protects people from this cultural habit from hurting them or becoming something that creates legal complications.
第二点，我也是边念边觉得蛮可爱，就是美国人觉得加拿大人太依赖政府了，好像一个 baby 吗？
Your government's too nice to you.
怎么会这样？
Stop crying for your mom. Be a man. All right. Too dependent on government services. The U.S. and Canada have different approaches to government involvement in society. The U.S. values individualism and free markets, believing the government should have minimal interference. In contrast, Canada follows a social democratic model, where the government actively provides healthcare, education, and welfare.
从优点来看啦，就是其实加拿大政府真的还蛮照顾大家在医疗啊，或者是教育方面。我们的加拿大同事们其实都还蛮赞许自己的政府的这一点，倒不会从软弱的角度去看它。
Now, to this point about the levels of government control, once again, America is America because it did not want the government to have lots of control. One of the things that the original founding fathers, we call them, 那些写那个 Declaration of Independence, right? They tried everything they could to limit government power or federal government power. They wanted each state to basically have a lot of its own power to decide things for itself. And sometimes the conflicts between the Republicans and the Democrats in American government are just conflicts between how much power the federal government should have. The Democrats typically want a bigger government or a government that controls more things like healthcare, whereas the Republicans typically want want more individual state rights, which often leads to a more free economy. So that's usually the stuff that we fight over is how big should the government be.
接下来进入第三点，真是不痛也不痒的讨厌点。Hockey.
Hockey. Too obsessed with hockey. Many Americans view Canadians as being overly obsessed with ice hockey. While sports are popular in both countries, hockey holds a unique place in Canadian culture, often overshadowing other sports. Canadians passionately follow the NHL, support their local teams, and even play hockey on frozen ponds in winter. From an American perspective, this level of devotion can seem excessive. Hockey dominates Canadian media, and international tournaments, such as the Olympics, become national events. Some Americans find it amusing that Canadians take hockey victories and losses so seriously, treating them as matters of national pride.
其实在美国他们也不是不喜欢这个曲棍球比赛，其实两国都是蛮喜欢的，只是美国人就觉得说你加拿大人是不是太痴迷啦？因为加拿大人好像就是我全国都锁定喜欢这个冰上曲棍球，而且这曲棍球比赛呢，某个程度也是这个温和的加拿大人一种释放压力的一种可能。为什么呢？因为这个其实蛮刺激的，他在这个比赛的过程里面，很多身体的碰撞，而且呢，他们手上拿的这个明明是要打曲棍球的东西，有时候是可以打人的，打人还不暂停，因为是合法的，所以这好像还蛮可以释放一下，说哦，打起来，打起来。
Right, so if Canadians are really, really ticked off and they're ready to fight, then they'll just ask you to go play a game of hockey.
我以为是就武器拿着，
对
约好，对，
But Americans really love hockey too, though.
对啊，对啊，对啊。
Actually, I had a coworker when I was living in St. Louis. St. Louis loves their hockey team, the St. Louis Blues, and they won the Stanley Cup, the big like Super Bowl, the World Cup of hockey, and I think it was 2017 or 2018, and that brother went out and he got a full tattoo of the Stanley Cup on his arm.
哇，
Right.
那真的是狂粉啊！
So obviously there are big hockey fans
对，
in
对，
the
对。
U.S.
而且其实对比一下，就加拿大人对这个冰上曲棍球的热爱，其实也比不过欧洲对足球的热爱。那个你看过那个足球流氓，就是借由足球比赛来发泄自己的情绪，然后就烧车子啊，然后打警察啊什么，就是当他输的时候，好像就理所当然可以做一些破坏社会的事情。
再加上 I remember in 2008 when I was living in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Phillies, Philadelphia loves its baseball team, okay? And so you describe a situation where 他们的那队就输了，所以他们就生气，就上街就开始乱做。Okay, so in 2008, the Phillies won the
赢
World
了也
Series,
这样，
and there was still a riot.
这是
People were just so happy
对啊，找借口。
that all they could think to do was to celebrate by going out and flipping over a bus.
我把他推倒是不是？
Like, what?
这太暴力了啦！
对. So I think that we can forgive Canadians for being a little passionate about their hockey. This seems to be a human thing, not a Canadian thing.
今天最后一点也是一个蛮就是好像找茬的点，就是美国人居然最不能接受加拿大人他们的发音，不行哦。
Weird pronunciations and British spellings. Unique Canadian pronunciations. About as a boot. This is one of the most well-known examples. While it's not exactly a boot, the Canadian pronunciation has a distinctive sound that can be heard in certain regions. Number 2, eh? Canadians often use eh at the end of sentences. It's a versatile interjection that can mean right, isn't it, or don't you think? For example, nice weather, eh? Number 3, Z instead of Z. Canadians, like the British, pronounce the letter Z as Z rather than Z. Number 4, sorry instead of sorry. The Canadian pronunciation of sorry sounds like sorry, which can be quite different from the American sorry. British spellings in Canadian English. Collar, C-O-L-O-U-R. Center, C-E-N-T-R-E. Favorite, F-A-V-O-U-R-I-T-E. Defense, D-E-F-E-N-C-E. Theater, T-H-E-A-T-R-E.
这真的是这每一国都应该都会这样，多少像以前啊，我这听我的美国同事来讲 ，you know， 然后开始讲的时候，我说 you know 什么？我不知道，我就是不知道，我才问你。然后
一直问我 you know 啊，他们一直问我 you know
对 you know I don't know what 就是他好像就是习惯用语嘛。还有就是这个结尾，其实日语啊，像台湾人我们常常会学，就学日本人就是哈嘿啊咦，对啊，其实都嘛是就是文化嘛。
对。
那另外一个当然就是英语的拼音，是因为加拿大属于大英国协的一部分，所以它沿用的这个英式的拼音好像也没有什么奇怪的地方，它就是习惯。更何况人家加拿大是双语国家，它是英语跟法语是同等地位的。
That's right. Yeah, but of course America wanted nothing to do with the British after we made that big break with guns back in 1776. So as many things as we could change, we changed them, you know. It's understandable.
以上就是今天的英文。
什么书？
我们今天简单的分享了美国人还有加拿大人他们彼此有点看不顺眼对方的地方。那至于加拿大到底会不会成为美国第51州呢？我想新闻会继续告诉我们答案。
So stay tuned.